In this episode, we shall have a general overview of both armies involved. It will be kept more or less simple as to get the gist of things, and I won't be able to cover everything, and some details may be missed. Anyhow, let's get into the meat of things. The British force that lands in France shortly before heading straight into Belgium is a roughly 1,000 man strong force. The British Expeditionary Force, or the B.E.F. for short, led by Field Marshal Sir John French. These are professional soldiers, arguably among the best trained in the world at the time. Some had seen action in the Middle East, North Africa, and the last Boer War. The B.E.F. is made up of two corps. One corps, led by the now famous or infamous, depending on your view, Sir Douglas Haig, and two corps led by General Sir Horace Dorian Smith. Let's look at the basic Tommy, which is a term used for the British soldier throughout both World Wars, though in North Africa it became rather morbid when the first Sherman tanks were used, with the Germans naming them Tommy Cookers. I'll leave that to you to figure out why. The British Army at this time in history is also among the more advanced. The uniform is khaki in colour, which helps with blending into the landscape. The use of leg wraps, known as puttees, are standard and provide support to the wearer's legs and helps protect the legs from the mud and grime on the battlefields, or just getting there. No helmet, just a simple khaki forage cap. Not until 1916, armies of all nations involved will issue proper helmets. The average Tommy has modern, for the day, webbing and an entrenching tool. The standard issue rifle the Tommies used was the Mark III short magazine Lee Enfield, or the SMLE for short, with a bayonet to be expected, and also it holds 10 rounds of .303 caliber. I'll leave a link to Forgotten Weapons if you want to find out more. The machine gun used by the B.E.F. and by most of the armies in the First World War in one form or another is the Vickers machine gun, which is also in .303 caliber, though the Vickers is just a Vickers made Maxim machine gun, which is a water-cooled, recoil-operated system. Now we'll move on to cavalry. Yes, cavalry. The armies at this time in history were horse-drawn, and there was minimal in terms of motorization, since the motor car was still in its infancy, more or less. Not to neglect the fact that armies were built upon the old models of the, quote, Napoleonic era. They were armed with a Lee Enfield rifle and straight-edged sabres, or lancers, depending on the type of unit involved. They wore puttees, like the foot troops, but they wrapped them from the shin downwards rather than starting from the ankle upwards like the rest of the foot soldiers. Some members were issued with a recon sketching board, since the cavalry were being used mainly for scouting or fast-moving mobile infantry if needs be on the modern battlefields. This is seen in the previous major wars, like the Franco-Prussian War and in the US Civil War, where, famously, Jeb Stuart's cavalry was too busy raiding Union supply lines rather than providing the whereabouts and disposition of the Union Army, and is seen as one of the few reasons why Robert E. Lee made the decisions he made and ultimately lost the Battle of Gettysburg. Finally, let's have a look at the artillery used by the B.E.F. at Mons, consisting of 13-pounders and 18-pounders, though they did not take much part at Mons. They were there, and worth mentioning. Though once trench warfare begins over the next few months, artillery becomes the biggest killer on the Western Front, as they develop more and more different kinds of shells and artillery systems and ways of it being used, like the creeping barrage, to name just one. Before getting to the other side of the wire, let's talk about communication across the battlefield. Primitive radios were rare but were used on occasion, but the most common form of communication was the courier, otherwise known as the runner. Some poor sod running into danger to deliver messages, whether that be orders, target coordinates, updates, and so on. The same goes for all armies involved. Famously, Adolf Hitler was a runner and earned medals for his courage. On a side note, I look at history and historical figures on a level plane, and Hitler did end up doing horrific atrocities later on. But here, at this point in history, he was just a failed artist, enlisted in the German army. And now, the German army. In this particular case, it's the first German army, of roughly 150,000 strong, under the command of General von Kluck, comprising of 7 corps, 2 corps commanded by von Linsingen, 3 corps commanded by von Lochow, 4 corps commanded by von Arnim, 9th corps commanded by von Quast, 3 reserve corps commanded by von Besseler, 4th Reserve Corps commanded by von Gronau, and the 9th Reserve Corps commanded by von Bochum. The 1st and 2nd German armies were supported by the 2 Cavalry Corps, under the command of von der Marwitz. The Germans did wear helmets, the famous spiked Pickelhaube, but they served little in the way of protection on a modern battlefield, though they did realise the danger of such a flashy helmet, and the German army issued coverings, and later the soldiers removed the spike entirely, until 1916 when the Stahlhelm was issued. The uniforms are no longer in Prussian blue, now a field grey, but pretty much the same uniform. They wore boots, though by 1916 puttees were issued. The webbing used was leather, and viewed by some outdated, yet throughout the Second World War they were still in usage, if not mildly updated. And each soldier had a shovel and the iconic bread bag. The rifle used is the 1898 Mauser Gewehr, or the 1888 Commission Rifle, both using 8mm ammunition, and both hold only 5 rounds, but then again multiple action rifles held but 5 rounds in that time. Again, I'll leave a link to Forgotten Weapons for the Mauser. The machine gun used by the German forces was the MG-08, the German-built Maxim gun, nicknamed the Spandau Ballet for its deadly usage. The German cavalry at this time still had somewhat flamboyant uniforms, but were dulled down to the field greys and light sky-like blues. Headgear-wise, they are still wearing the old Napoleonic and Franco-Prussian War era style headwear. From what I can gather from the research I have done, they possessed carbines, pretty much the forerunner to the Mauser 98K, lancers and straight-edge sabres, all in all similar to the B.E.F cavalry, on paper at least. Famously, when it comes to artillery, the Germans are known for the best for the day. Companies like Krupp and Rheinmetall producing rather devastating pieces of artillery, like Big Bertha for example. In 1914, the artillery used by the German armies were the 7.7mm field gun, the 105mm howitzer, 13cm field gun, and the 21cm Mörser. However, amongst the first engagements preceding the main Battle of Mons, the soldiers, the generals, and history will find out the hard way the lessons of modern industrialized warfare. In the next episode, the armies converge in Belgium and the opening moves of a desperate battle ahead. Hope to see you there.